Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Natural World Weekly, the show where we learn about the wonder of our natural world through science and animals. My name is Avery. I'm a biochem student here at UIC, and every week on this show, I'll walk you through a bizarre animal and an interesting natural phenomenon, and you do not need to be a scientist to understand this podcast. I hope you'll enjoy part 1 of 2 of our summer special series. Today, we'll be talking about a viral story from 2020 of orcas supposedly sinking boats and killing off the ultra wealthy, and the scientific explanation for how sunscreen works and why you need it. It was July 2020, the height of the pandemic. Blinding Lights was playing on every radio station, and an orca named Gladys Blanca, or White Gladys, was making headlines. She was 15 at the time, a new mother, and living in the waters of the Iberian Peninsula, or off the coast of Spain and Portugal. For my fellow Americans out there, those are the countries at the very western end of Europe, near the top of Africa. White Gladys, this absolute diva, made headlines for sinking multiple yachts. And I remember seeing this on TikTok, and they sort of framed her as like this communist Robin Hood icon because she did primarily attack the rich. This behavior caught the attention of both the public and marine biologists alike, since orcas had previously almost no record of purposefully attacking and sinking vessels. White Gladys was in the news again in 2022 after a paper published about her and her pod's rampages went viral, especially the part where the authors speculated that this could be a sign of intelligent and calculated revenge on humans that they had orchestrated. But when biologists studied White Gladys, they noticed that she had many scratches and scars on her body, and a new wild hypothesis was formed as to why they had suddenly started attacking boats. They suggested that White Gladys and other members of her pod could have suffered from boat strikes, and thus these highly intelligent marine mammals could have started to think of boats as a dangerous being that they needed to attack. The internet sort of ran with this guess, and the narrative became that the orcas were angry at the rich humans for ruining their ocean and started maliciously and knowingly attacking them. I think this narrative was very, very much furthered by the state of public consciousness at the time. People were facing massive rates of unemployment and loneliness, while many top executives found ways to make money off people during the pandemic. And instead of quarantining, they were off vacationing. And to even add to that, I think that the SeaWorld orca abuse scandal will always be in the back of most people's minds when they even think of orcas. This narrative that these abused and mistreated orcas are fighting back against the evil, rich, powerful people is something that we really wanted back then. But, unfortunately, we now know that this explanation is almost certainly not true. It is true that orcas are highly intelligent and have really complex social structures and relationships within the pod. Because of this, they are very playful animals who engage and play with each other all the time, and part of that involves raking their teeth along other orcas and very lightly biting them. When White Gladys's scars were finally able to be examined closely, scientists discovered that many of them looked like these teeth marks from her fellow orca friends. Additionally, members of her pod have been caught in fishing nets many times, as orcas do like to try to take unclaimed fish from the nets, so it's also likely that the scarring could come from there. However, there is no evidence that she was ever caught in a boat strike. That's definitely not to say that boat strikes aren't a huge and common problem for dolphins and whales, but in this case, the scarring was probably not caused by that. There's also another problem with this quote-unquote class uprising orca hypothesis, and that is there are many documented examples of orcas being hit by boats and their behavior afterwards, and none of them went on a similar rampage against boats. They're usually weakened in some way and have a shorter lifespan compared to orcas without an attack history. So now that this previous guess is unlikely, do we have anything to replace it? Yes, there is a new prevailing theory, and I think it's a decent replacement vibes wise. You know how I mentioned earlier that orcas are very playful? Well, marine biologists have noticed that the orcas in Iberia have a very significant preference for sailboats with spade rudders specifically. They believe it's because they can keep up with slower sailboats, and spade rudders are unique in that they are spinnable with enough force. So they think that the orcas are playing with these boats by twirling the rudders back and forth, which inevitably ends with the damage to the boat and sinking. If you have a giant dolphin, which I learned while researching that orcas, which are also called killer whales, are actually dolphins. But if you have a giant dolphin lunging at the bottom of your boat to try to play with the rudder, it's reasonable that it's going to end up causing structural damage. The general advice for someone sailing in the Iberian Peninsula and really anywhere in orca habitat, should you choose to do that, I guess, is that your boat is safer if it has less parts near the bottom that are movable. Because if you do have that, the orcas love to fidget with them and could accidentally sink your boat. This theory also explains why the ultra rich sailing on their yachts are more often targeted, because yachts usually have these spinnable rudders and parts on the bottom, and they cruise at a slow pace. Now that myth has been busted, and before we move on to the science segment, I figured some basic orca / killer whale knowledge would be good to share, because I think they are definitely a misunderstood animal. So yes, they are dolphins. They're the largest dolphin on the planet. They exist in coastal oceans all throughout the world, and they are some of the most intelligent and socially oriented animals out there. Just for reference, they are so socially advanced that each pod or group of orcas have unique sounds and calls, unique knowledge and preferences passed down generation to generation, like what food to eat, where to hunt, etc. And they hunt together in a coordinated plan adapted to the specific conditions. They have such an advanced and unique system of communication through cries and clicks that they're able to plan hunts together. Orcas are truly incredible animals, and if you'd like to learn more about them and the conservation movement behind them, check out Whale and Dolphin Conservation America. They're a great organization and were a super helpful resource when researching for this episode. But now, let's move into our deep dive into the science behind how just a simple lotion is able to save you from the deadly rays of the sun. The sun is a giant fiery ball of gases, and it is constantly shooting off deadly waves called ultraviolet light directly towards Earth. There's 3 different kinds of these deadly rays: UVA, UVB, and UVC. They're different because they have different amounts of spaces between the waves. C has the least, and it goes up to A. I really feel like it should be the other way around, but whatever. If you imagine a wavy line, the less space in between these individual hills, the tighter together this line is. Because of that, C is tighter and thus a more violent and powerful wave compared to B and then compared to A. However, it's all dangerous, and all ultraviolet light has tight enough waves to be able to go through your skin and damage your cells. Compare that to another wave like radio frequencies that are so loose and have such big spaces in between the bumps that they cannot go through your skin or really damage you. This cell damage is what actually causes skin cancer from the sun's rays. Thankfully, UVC from the sun is actually blocked by our ozone layer. Before that existed, animals couldn't live on land at all due to all that UVC. However, we still have to worry about A and B getting into our bodies and causing harm. But thankfully, scientists have made something that blocks off these waves for us. But how does it work? There are 2 main types of sunscreens: mineral and chemical sunscreens. You may have heard of this. Mineral sunscreens are made of metals and are formulas like zinc oxide or titanium dioxide creams that lifeguards like to use and make little white marks on their noses with. But there's a reason why lifeguards opt for the mineral sunscreens. They're highly effective and you can easily see when it's fading. mineral sunscreens work by physically deflecting off the UVA and B rays off the surface of your skin. The zinc oxide crystals in the cream create a physical barrier, kind of like clothes, where the UV rays bounce and scatter away rather than going through your skin. This is really effective and tried and true, but I guess people don't really want to use them since your whole body will be white and it's expensive, but I guess that's fair enough. Some people may be concerned about the zinc and titanium going into your bloodstream, and I don't know, heavy metal poisoning is something that's a big thing with like the natural Maha movement, but thankfully zinc sunscreen can't physically absorb into your body. That's because zinc oxide is a giant ionic compound that is not making it past the layers of your skin into the cells. It's safe and effective, and it also just turns you white. Chemical sunscreens, however, do actually absorb into your skin and have an entirely different mechanism to mineral formulas. Because people wanted an invisible barrier rather than the looming white zinc oxide on top of their skin, chemical sunscreens were born. Basically, when you rub in the sunscreen, it seeps into your skin layers and forms a filter into your skin where it's applied. This filter catches the UV rays that seep into your skin and chemically reacts with the rays to release them off as heat. This is super cool to me, but it's not as effective since you can't see whether or not the barrier is present. Water eventually washes off this filter, and chemical sunscreen filters typically only target a narrow range of UV light that doesn't cover both A and B. That's why you can be fully sunscreened up and still get burnt. My advice, if you wanted to find a chemical sunscreen, which I mean, I would rather wear it even though it's less effective, is I would say try to look for something that explicitly says it covers UVA and B. It might be harder to find and it might be more expensive, so I get it if not. Another thing to consider when buying chemical sunscreens is, what is SPF? What does that mean? Does it actually matter? SPF stands for Sun Protection Factor, and it's a measurement required for sunscreens to put where during testing, they'll see how long it takes untanned skin to turn red with their sunscreen on and compare it to skin without the sunscreen. Manufacturers use this data to calculate this and round it off into a clean number. So, for example, if I put on SPF 15 sunscreen and none of it gets washed off or doesn't, all of it absorbs and everything, which obviously isn't realistic, then the skin that is protected by the sunscreen will absorb 1/15 of the waves that it normally would and will last 15 times longer without getting sun damage. Now, I can say before this, I honestly thought that higher SPF meant that it was like more intensely protecting my skin, I guess, but it actually measures how long the sunscreen lasts, not the quality. Of course, there are many, many limitations to this SPF system. One is that the UV index day to day changes drastically, especially in the summer, so your SPF 30 will last you much less time on a higher UV day. Another limitation is the fact that the way that they tell sun damage is by observing redness in skin. So the subjects from the data are going to only be people who turn red, if you catch my drift. It's going to be tested on people who could use the zinc oxide and have it blend in. Because these are the test subjects being used to calculate SPF, anyone with even remotely dark skin is not going to be factored into the SPF number. The way your skin might react to the sun will be different from the one-size-fits-all number that they advertise, so figuring out how often to reapply it can be really difficult under the system. And while we're on the subject, there are some really interesting scientific advancements being made in sunscreens, as scientists are looking to make sunscreen modeled after melanin, since it naturally has some UV binding properties that function kind of similar to chemical sunscreen. There was a very cool paper published in 2023 from McGill and The Ohio State University, where they fully mapped the structure of melanin and decoded the function behind how it does its own chemical process. This could potentially be harnessed by biotechnologists and cosmetic companies to make an even better version of our current chemical sunscreen. Nature has so many cool and useful chemicals. Thank you all so much for watching this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. This was part 1 of 2 of my summer-themed episodes. I hope this gets you in the summer spirit. To be honest, I am not a fan of heat or summer, but I am really enjoying these early days before it gets brutal out there. Reminder that all sources will be linked in the description, and until next week, remember to stay kind and curious, and buy broad spectrum sunscreen.